I didn't marry into cruelty. That's what I tell myself now. At the beginning, everything looked ordinary, even hopeful. My husband wasn't romantic, but he was steady, quiet, practical. His mother lived with us, which everyone said was normal. Asterisk family-oriented asterisk, they called it. I believed them. I thought love was something that grew over time. Something you earned by being patient, respectful, and useful. So I tried to be all three. The first sign wasn't yelling or insults. It was correction. The way my mother-in-law would hover when I cooked, adjusting the salt after I'd already tasted it. The way she'd rearrange the house when I wasn't home, then comment casually, "This looks better, don't you think?" My husband never intervened. If anything, he nodded. Agreed. Let her speak for both of them. She's just trying to help, he'd say. You're too sensitive. That phrase became familiar quickly. Too sensitive when she criticized my clothes. Too sensitive when she corrected my speech in front of guests. Too sensitive when decisions about my own home were made without me. I started shrinking without realizing it. I learned how to stay quiet during dinner. How to smile while being dismissed. How to wake up earlier so everything was done before anyone could complain. And still, it wasn't enough. My husband began to change too, or maybe he always had been this way. He'd come home tired and irritated, finding fault in small things. A plate left out. A question asked at the wrong time. His mother watched it happen with approval. Sometimes she'd sigh and say, "Marriage teaches a woman discipline." I didn't answer. I was learning discipline very well. Money was another thing. I worked, but my income was temporary in their eyes. Something secondary. My husband controlled the finances, consulting his mother before making decisions. When I asked about savings or plans, I was told not to worry. That's not your burden, he'd say. But somehow, every burden still landed on me. I noticed how invisible I'd become the day my birthday passed without acknowledgement. No cake. No message. Just dinner as usual. When I mentioned it quietly, my mother-in-law frowned. Adults don't need attention, she said. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the tap running so no one would hear. I wasn't abused loudly. I was erased slowly. And the worst part, I thought this was normal. I told myself this was marriage. This was sacrifice. This was strength. But somewhere deep inside, quiet, stubborn, almost forgotten, something in me was still watching. Still learning. Still waiting. I learned early that reacting only made things worse. If I defended myself, I was called disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was accused of being moody. So I chose the safer option. Silence. Days began to follow a pattern. Wake up before everyone else. Clean quietly. Prepare meals the way my mother-in-law preferred. Listen more than I spoke. Move through the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. My husband noticed everything, but only when it inconvenienced him. If his shirt wasn't ironed perfectly, it became a lecture about gratitude. If dinner was late, he reminded me how hard he worked. If I seemed tired, he accused me of laziness. His mother never missed a chance to reinforce it. A good wife anticipates, she'd say. She doesn't wait to be told. I began anticipating everything. Their moods. Their preferences. Their silences. What I didn't anticipate was how small my world would become. Friends stopped visiting. Phone calls became shorter. I stopped sharing details about my life because there was nothing good to share, and I didn't want pity. At work, I was different. There, my voice still worked. People listened when I spoke. My ideas were acknowledged. I was competent, capable, useful in a way that didn't feel humiliating. I started staying longer hours, not because I had to, but because it felt like breathing. My husband noticed. "You're changing," he said one evening. "I'm working," I replied. He didn't like that answer. He began asking questions, checking times, commenting on my clothes before I left the house. His mother grew colder. "Ambition doesn't suit a married woman," she said once, stirring her tea slowly. It makes her forget her place. I didn't argue. But something shifted that day. Not outwardly. Internally. I began watching instead of absorbing. I noticed how they spoke to others. Polite, charming, respectable. How their cruelty only existed behind closed doors. How careful they were with appearances. I noticed how my husband avoided responsibility but demanded authority. How his mother thrived on control disguised as wisdom. Patterns began to form. And patterns can be studied. There was one evening that stayed with me. We had guests over, distant relatives. My mother-in-law praised my cooking loudly, exaggeratedly. My husband smiled proudly, placing his hand on my shoulder like a display. Later that night, in the kitchen, she criticized everything she had just praised. You embarrassed me with that dish, she said sharply. I looked at her, stunned. You said it was good. In public, she replied. Don't be foolish. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about improvement. It was about dominance. And dominance only survives when the other person stays unaware. I stopped explaining myself after that. Stopped trying to be understood. Instead, I started learning. About finances. About social dynamics. About how respect is earned, and how it's taken. I read. I listened. I observed. I didn't leave. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But for the first time, I knew one thing clearly. I would not disappear here. The opportunity didn't arrive loudly. It never does. It came disguised as inconvenience. A senior colleague asked if I could help with a project outside my usual responsibilities. It meant longer hours, more pressure, and less time at home. I agreed immediately. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted space. Mental space. Emotional space. A reminder that I still existed beyond that house. When my husband found out, his reaction was cold. Who approved this? He asked. My manager. He frowned. You should have discussed it with us first. *us. His mother echoed him later. A woman who stays out late invites rumors. I looked at her calmly. It's work. She smiled thinly. So you say. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. The project was demanding. High visibility. Real stakes. And I was good at it. Not perfect, but thoughtful. Consistent. Reliable. I noticed how differently people treated me when my input mattered. How confidence grew when my effort was respected. At home, the contrast became sharper. My husband grew irritable. Suspicious. He asked more questions than before, often framed as concern. You're not neglecting your duties, are you? I knew what he meant. I started documenting things. Quietly. Not confrontationally. Just notes. Dates. Financial patterns. Conversations. Not for revenge. For clarity. My mother-in-law sensed the shift. She began inserting herself into everything. Critiquing my work schedule. Commenting on my phone calls. Making remarks designed to undermine my confidence. You think people out there care about you, she said once. They use you. Family is forever. I didn't respond. But I noticed something else too. She depended on me more than she admitted. Power dynamics are rarely one-sided. For household management. For social appearances. For stability. Power dynamics are rarely one-sided. My husband tried another tactic. Guilt. He talked about sacrifices. About tradition. About how his mother had endured worse. I listened politely. But endurance without growth no longer sounded noble to me. The project ended successfully. I was recognized. Quietly. Professionally. No applause. No announcements. But my manager started involving me in strategic discussions. Money followed. Not dramatically. But steadily. I opened a separate savings account. Not secretly. Just independently. That act alone felt revolutionary. When my husband noticed, his reaction wasn't anger. It was fear. "What if something happens?" he asked. I met his eyes calmly. "Then I'll be prepared." That word again. Prepared. He didn't like that. Neither did his mother. But they couldn't stop it without revealing too much. And for the first time since my marriage began, I realized something crucial. They needed me to stay small. And I was done cooperating. The resistance didn't explode. It tightened. My mother-in-law became quieter, which was far more unsettling than her criticism. She watched me closely now, my movements, my tone, my timing. My husband changed too. He didn't argue anymore. He monitored. He asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. He lingered near my phone when it buzzed. He commented on how often my name came up in conversations that weren't about home. "You're becoming different," he said one evening. "I'm growing," I replied. He didn't like that word. They began working around me instead of through me. Decisions were made without my input. Invitations were extended and withdrawn before I could respond. My presence was managed. Useful when convenient, invisible when not. It was deliberate. And I understood why. Because growth threatens systems that rely on silence. Then came the line they crossed without realizing it. My husband suggested, gently, falsely concerned, that I reduce my involvement at work. "You've been tired," he said. "People might start to notice." "Notice what?" I asked. "That you're distracted." I looked at him carefully. "You mean successful?" He didn't answer. His mother tried a different approach. She praised me publicly again, complimented my discipline, spoke proudly of my dedication, as long as it benefited her reputation. Privately, she reminded me of my place. I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I adjusted. I stopped sharing details. Stopped explaining decisions. Stopped seeking approval. At home, I became neutral, calm, unreactive. At work, I became indispensable. I learned something critical during this period. They were used to controlling my emotions, not my competence. So I protected the one thing they couldn't reach. My capability. My husband once tried to embarrass me in front of guests, questioning my priorities, joking about my busy schedule. I smiled and responded evenly, discussing a recent project with confidence and clarity. The room shifted. People listened. Respect moved toward me naturally. I saw it in my mother-in-law's eyes. Recognition. Not pride. Calculation. She understood something had changed, but she didn't yet understand how far. I didn't leave the marriage. I outgrew the version of myself they relied on. Quietly, patiently, and without asking permission. Growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in how people start asking for your opinion instead of giving you instructions. That's how it happened for me. Invitations came directly to my phone now. Not through my husband. Not through family channels. Professional events. Panels. Strategy sessions. Rooms I had never been allowed into before, not because I lacked ability, but because I lacked permission. I stopped waiting for permission. My work expanded beyond my role. I was trusted with budgets. With people. With outcomes. My name began circulating independently of my marriage. At home, the shift was unmistakable. My husband noticed first. He began asking questions again, but this time they weren't dismissive. They were probing. How important is this project? Who else is involved? Are you getting paid extra for this? Not curiosity. Assessment. His mother noticed next. She adjusted her tone around me. Became cautious. Almost respectful in public. But her eyes followed me more closely than ever, measuring every interaction. She had always believed status flowed through her. Now she wasn't sure. There was a moment that confirmed it. A community event. Formal. Well attended. I had been invited to speak, briefly, professionally. Nothing dramatic. My husband assumed we'd attend together. But when we arrived, I was guided forward. Separately. Introduced by name. Not as a wife. Not as a daughter-in-law. As myself. I spoke calmly. Confidently. About work. About impact. About responsibility. Applause followed. Not thunderous. Sincere. I saw my husband standing still, clapping slower than everyone else. I saw my mother-in-law's smile freeze for half a second before she recovered. That pause told me everything. At home that night, no one criticized me. No one praised me either. Silence filled the house differently now. He tried to reassert authority later. Subtle comments about schedules, expectations, obligations. I listened. Then I did what worked best. I continued. I started investing my income thoughtfully. Not recklessly. Strategically. I sought advice. Built assets. Expanded influence. Financial independence doesn't look rebellious. It looks calm. And calm is terrifying to people who rely on fear. My husband became inconsistent, supportive one moment, distant the next. He struggled with something he couldn't name. Irrelevance. His mother tried once more to remind me of hierarchy. A woman must remember where she comes from, she said pointedly. I smiled gently. And where she's going. That was the first time she said nothing back. I hadn't challenged them. I hadn't left. I hadn't broken the family. I had simply become someone they could no longer control. And power, once questioned, never fully recovers. Power changes a household long before anyone admits it has. The first sign wasn't respect. It was dependence. My schedule started dictating the rhythm of the house. Meals adjusted around my meetings. Events planned around my availability. Decisions paused until I weighed in. Not because I demanded it. Because it was practical. My income stabilized things. My connections opened doors. My presence smoothed interactions that once ended in tension. My husband leaned on that without saying so. His work began to falter, not dramatically, but noticeably. Projects stalled. Promotions slowed. His confidence, once loud and unquestioned, grew brittle. He came to me for advice. Tentatively at first. What would you do? He asked one night, staring at his phone. I answered honestly. Not as a subordinate. As an equal. My mother-in-law watched this shift with unease. She had always positioned herself as the authority. The matriarch. The voice of wisdom. Now she waited for my reaction before speaking in public. It unsettled her. There was a gathering, extended family, community leaders, people whose opinions mattered. Someone praised me openly. Extended family, community leaders, people whose opinions mattered. Someone praised me openly. Not just for work, but for leadership. For composure. For contribution. My mother-in-law nodded along, but her hands tightened in her lap. Later that evening, she pulled me aside. You've changed the balance, she said quietly. I met her gaze calmly. Balance was never equal. She studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she sighed. You're stronger than I thought. It wasn't an apology, but it was recognition. My husband struggled more. Strength in a partner can feel like competition to someone who relied on dominance. He became quieter, less sure, occasionally resentful. But he didn't lash out. Because the world had begun reflecting something back to him that he couldn't deny. I was respected. Independently. There was a moment, small, telling, when he introduced me to someone new. This is my wife, he said, then paused. And she leads. He listed my role carefully, accurately. That pause mattered. He had recalibrated. At home, authority softened into negotiation. Expectations turned into conversations. Not equality. Not yet. But movement. My mother-in-law began deferring to me openly, asking my opinion, acknowledging my decisions. She never said the words asterisk you were right star. She didn't need to. The house felt different now. Not warmer. Clearer. And clarity, once established, doesn't disappear. I had not left. I had not fought. I had not broken anything. I had risen. And in doing so, I had changed the shape of everything around me. It didn't happen all at once. Respect rarely does. It settles in slowly, like dust after a long storm,